Hello, folks, and welcome to Thursday Night Live with H New York. My name is Adam Jacobs, and I'm really pleased to be here to discuss what I think is a fascinating topic. There's an old Chinese proverb that says you should be blessed, or perhaps cursed, to live in interesting times. And I think that this year has provided no shortage of interest on a variety of levels. But for me, one of the most fascinating things outside of Corona and everything else that's happened in the world this year is the debate that has come in this country to the forefront of the benefits of a different economic system that the traditional capitalist model that has been embraced by the US for quite some time, although the alternative, or one of the alternatives, socialism, has been with us for a long time as well. It's just been sort of underground. This year, it came to the forefront, especially with the presidential debates and certain candidates who were rising in the polls. And I'd like to just start by reading a quote from one of those candidates who says the following, said, "We live in the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. But that really means little because almost all of that wealth is controlled by a tiny handful of individuals. There is something profoundly wrong when the top 0.1% owns almost as much as the bottom 90%. And when 99% of all new income goes to the top 1%. There is something profoundly wrong when one family owns more wealth than the bottom 130 million Americans. This type of immoral, unsustainable economy is not what America is supposed to be about. This has got to change, and together we will change it. The change begins when we say to the billionaire class, you can't have it all." So those words are from Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. And I thought what to contrast that with. And I went back a little farther, and there's a book called The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek. And he sees the socialist alternative as being a lot more pernicious than Bernie apparently does. And he saw in the rise of socialism, Nazism, and fascism in the 20th century in Europe as a regression, as a desire to return to an earlier time in history, the time of serfdom. So he said, the serfs were essentially demanding, please re-enslave us. Socialism was and remains another form of shirking responsibility. By handing all responsibility back to a bloated government, socialism in most of its forms attempts the absurd, to liberate people by divesting them of their responsibilities and the power to run their own lives. So that is obviously a very different way of looking at the system. Our question for tonight is, which system, socialism or capitalism, is more moral? And what might be the Jewish take on that question? So in order to explore that, I am honored to be joined tonight by Mr. Joel Greenblatt, who is the managing partner of Gotham Capital, a hedge fund that he founded in 1985. Since 1996, he's also been an adjunct professor at Columbia University Business School. He appears frequently on CNBC and is the author of 4 books, one of which I have read, the most recent of which is called Common Sense, The Investor's Guide to Equality, Opportunity, and Growth. So please welcome to the show, Mr. Joel Greenblatt.
Hey, Adam.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Good. Thank you so much for being here. It really is a pleasure for me and an honor, and especially to hear from someone of your expertise on these matters. But I was very interested when I just heard about your book, coming out, your new book, and I benefited from you reading one of your others very, very greatly, and found it to be fascinating. And I know that they're very popular, and I know that you have the ability to take pretty advanced concepts and to bring them down so that a layperson could really deal with them and understand them, hence their popularity. But what was your specific motivation for writing this latest book?
That's a great question. I guess I'm a capitalist, but the system is far from perfect. It needs work. It's the best system, it's the worst system except for all the others, is a good way to put it. And there are things that we can do. First of all, I guess capitalism works if everyone has a fair shot. And there are so many places where people don't have an equal or fair shot that those things bother me, and there's things that we can do to change them. There's also places that we can give people more opportunities. I wrote the book to say, I look at the world like an investor, and I say, how would an investor go to solve some of these problems we see? What can the government do? What can the private sector do? How can we use the power of incentives, which is so part of the capitalist system, to try to solve some of these problems? So kind of using the tools of capitalism, using the tools of the private sector, but also using the tools that government can bring to bear, even if it's supported by the capitalist system, to help as many people as possible and to make changes that I think are fairly simple to make things better. I'm not for I'm for equality of opportunity. I don't think we have to have equality for income. I do think that everyone should have medical care and a living wage and things of that nature. And so that's what I'm in favor of getting closer to than what the current system does. And that's really why I wrote the book, to say, what else can we do? What else can we do using the powers of government, the private sector, and incentives to get closer to an ideal world that we'd all like?
So essentially, to use capitalism to produce greater morality in the world. Is that fair to say?
Sure, but I am not taking away the power of government. Government can use the benefits of capitalism. I mean, the only way government gets money is from the private sector. And so how can government either set rules or use some of that money that they get from the private sector more efficiently or better, or to create better outcomes?
Okay. So one of the interesting things that I've noticed is capitalism seems to anger people. I don't know if that's, again, I don't know if that's increased recently. I don't know if it's an outgrowth of the Bernie Bros and the popularity of some of his ideas. But it's interesting to note that just when we posted this event on our Facebook page, there was a lot of vitriol that was attached to it. And I was really a little taken aback by it. I thought, here's two quotes for you, and I'd like just to get your reaction. But one is old, but you're familiar with the concept. I think it was attributed to Balzac, that it says, behind every great fortune, there is a great crime, which I don't agree with, but that was his sentiment, and I think that was popular in its day. But the one quote that I saw on our Facebook page a couple of days ago said, quote, learning ethics from a hedge fund manager is like learning public health from a tobacco lobbyist. What is your reaction? What would you say to somebody who has that attitude towards capitalism?
I think that's a great question. I'm not really trying to persuade anyone to have a different opinion about capitalism. I think it's a system that in many senses doesn't work for everyone. And my goal is simply to make it better, to work better and particularly for those who aren't getting a fair shake in the system. So I think engaging in that kind of argument isn't that productive. We have a system. There's plenty of places. You can go to Venezuela or Cuba or any place else if that seems like a better system to you. Europe has a system where it's more government controlled, and that might be attractive to some people. I believe that capitalism in some form probably will end up being the best system for the most amount of people, and I just would like to make it better using some of the knowledge that I gained from looking at business models. That's what I do as an investor. I try to decide which business models make sense, and so when I see something that doesn't make sense of what we're doing, how would an investor go about fixing it, or what doesn't make sense? How can we fix that? And so there are certain things in our economy that don't make sense, and I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yes.
But I think if you want the most health care for people, and you want the best jobs and most opportunity, then capitalism provides a lot of that. And it's you're the expert on Torah, and I'm not the expert on morals. I understand the capitalist system, and my goal would be to make it work better for as many people as possible.
Okay, that's admirable, and I think that message, I would think, would strike many people as being the exact right approach, and therefore it's hard for me to understand some of the animosity that I'm seeing. Why there would be a wholesale rejection of the entire system. The system to me seems somewhat neutral, and depending on whose hands it's in is what it's going to produce. But be that as it may, let's take it from a slightly different angle and keeping with the theme of, well, morality. Is it, in your opinion, immoral? And I think I know the answer, but I'm asking just so we could talk about it out loud for the sake of the audience. Is it immoral to be wealthy? And should there be a cap on the amount of wealth that somebody could have?
I think I don't know who would be deciding how much that would be. I'm not sure how that would mess with incentives, or how many good things would not happen as a result of taking away those incentives. And
can you give an example?
Well, if you had a set price for drugs that was too low, no one would be incented to spend the billions of dollars to create new ones, which might be good or bad for most people, but a lot of life-saving things have happened as a result of people having the incentive to make money from creating new things. I don't know if people like their iPhone or not, and I don't know how much someone should make, but if you said you could only make so much on it, maybe it wouldn't exist. And there's been a lot of progress made from incentives. I mean, look, it's very funny. I've taught Columbia Business School for 23 years, and one of the questions I ask my students first day of class is, who knows the benefit of being good at picking stocks or investing or whatever? And the kids go around coming up with all kinds of answers, including, we set prices for the system and they're more efficient because everyone's working. And, they come up with other examples like that. And I'm not denying that, but my answer is that, the market would function pretty well without you. And you're pretty smart and learned. These are 27-year-olds who've been out working for a while, coming back to an Ivy League school to get an MBA. And I tell them, I don't think there's a lot of social value in being particularly good at finding undervalued securities, and making money from them.
Okay.
And then I tell them, well, what the heck am I doing here? Because I'm one step removed from that. I'm teaching you. I'm coming back here and teaching you how to do something that I don't think has a lot of great social value. So I'm even one step removed from, a high social value. So we can go into that. And by the same token, I've had a wonderful career. I've really enjoyed doing what I do. And so what I told my students is, look, if you are successful at this career, and I'm helping you to get there, and you use some of the lessons from this class to get there, I only ask that you take some of your success and figure out a way to give back that's meaningful to you, some way to give back from your success. And I think there's nothing immoral, depending on what you do with your earnings. I mean, of course, people give us money and they hope we do well with it, and so we're helping them, save for their retirement, or we manage money for a lot of endowments for nonprofits.
Yeah.
And we're helping them and earn more money, but someone else would do it if we didn't do it. I mean, it's not, we're not saving lives. And so I fully am aware of that. Also, don't think I'm hurting anyone. We are helping people reach their goals. But it's not the biggest social value I can think of. It's probably one of the smallest, but yet we get really well paid. So I ask, figure out a good way to give back if you're successful at this. And I think that could be, not everyone's a doctor or in their day job is literally saving lives. And so everyone plays their part in the economy, and it really depends what you do with the success.
Listen, I can tell you that working in nonprofit for the last 20 years, were it not for people like yourself and other people in the finance industry, we would all be in serious trouble. I mean, so many great things are happening as the result of the kinds of investing that you and others are doing. I think that even if the activity doesn't have some kind of intrinsic value, ultimately it does, because it ends up going to places that make all kinds of things happen. And I just don't see how they would function otherwise. In addition to that, I was thinking about the commenter on Facebook and just wondering, he was using a computer probably built by Michael Dell or Steve Jobs. The software was probably by Bill Gates, and Facebook itself is Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, these are all, I know they're not strictly in finance, but these are all people who got paid extremely well for the development of all the benefits that they're using. And it struck me as so ironic, let's say, to be critiquing the system that was able to generate all of that through the system itself. And I wonder sometimes if people pause and take the full stock of exactly how much they're benefiting from these people. And yes, they deserve to get compensated, it seems to me, because they're producing extraordinary value for the world. And I don't know how many people are employed by Dell, Microsoft, and Apple and Facebook, but I'm sure it's a gigantic number of people, all feeding their families and living their lives as a result of the vision of a small handful of people. So,
the way capitalism works is you're creating things that people want. That's the only way you make money. And in long term, you don't employ people that you don't treat well. And long term, you don't stay in business if you're not creating something that someone else wants or needs. So that's the way it works.
One more question about resentment, is just because I find it to be interesting. I mean, I'm curious to the degree that you think resentment is playing a role here. Like, do people resent the wealthy just simply because they don't have it? I've also noticed that I don't see the resentment as much applied to the world of sports or entertainment. Is there a reason why finance gets the animus, and other industries are like, yeah, no, we're okay with that?
Well, I don't think it's so much fun to watch someone invest money. I'd rather watch LeBron James too. So I agree with those people. I don't know what else to say. I mean, they're bringing joy and excitement and fun, and if people are willing to pay to see them, there's probably a good reason. And I don't think we're bringing as much joy, even if we're bringing some security to some people and everything else. But I'm not going to argue that one.
Okay, fair enough. Is there, and I'm hoping to make a pivot in our conversation at a certain point and bring it more towards the spiritual questions and Judaic angles on this topic. But I just wanted to ask a couple other things, which is you are an expert in the stock market. And is there a specific way in your thinking to use the stock market to promote ethics and morality better?
I would have to think about that a lot. I don't know if the stock market in general, but I think if you think about business, I mean, stocks are only ownership shares of businesses, right? So understanding how they work and how value is created is very valuable, especially if you're going to do it yourself. I think it's much more valuable to create a business on your own, which can employ people that can provide services or goods that people want. And there's a great value to that. Investing and providing capital to those businesses that are doing those nice things, employing people and providing services and goods that people want, is, I would say, a moral thing to do. It's providing a living for people. It's providing all the revenue that government gets. It's only from the private sector. So whatever good the government does, it comes from there. It pretty much a not-for-profit is by definition not-for-profit. So they have to get their
Yeah.
revenues from someplace.
Yes.
And so I think to the extent that a vibrant economy, which is represented by the stock market in general, is important for everyone. It's important for the government. It's important for all charitable work. It's important for employment. It's important to produce things that people need. This is not an evil enterprise. It can be if people abuse things, take advantage. But the whole argument about whether people, you can't really create or it's very hard to create a long-term business that takes advantage of its employees. They don't stay very long. It's a free country and people can move around. To the or if you provide shoddy goods, you might get away with it for a year or two, but you're not going to be in business very long. So if you're treating your employees well and you're creating things that people want or goods that people want over the long term, it travels towards good. You're creating money to support the government, which supports, redistributes it to places that could use it where the system isn't working for. And so there's a lot of arguments you could make for a capitalist system that really is responsible for paying for all the good stuff. If there were no incentives to create anything that people need, it would be very hard to supply them. I mean, we saw the Soviet Union. I wrote one of the anecdotes I wrote in my book was that my first year economics teacher in college was an expert in the Soviet Union, communist system. And so he tells a story about getting to the Moscow train station at 8:10 in the morning for the 8:20 train. And of course, it's a communist system. It's not very good. And there's no train at 8:20. There's no train at 8:30. There's no train at 8:40. And he finally goes to the station manager and says, "Hey, what happened to the 8:20 train?" And the station manager says, "The glorious 8:20 train came through at 8:05 this morning."
Okay.
So that's missetting incentives, meaning the government sets all the standards, and so the standards were set get there fast, not like carry passengers.
Right.
And so no one was on the train.
That's funny. And I don't know, to me, I don't have maybe the fear of socialism that Hayek seems to have. I'd be curious what you think about it. But, when I looked back in the 80s when we had the division of East and West Germany, the exact same people, the same language, the same history, and yet a different economic system on either side of the wall. And it seemed, at least to me at the time, so clear that one was producing significantly higher levels of happiness than the other side. And I wonder if there could be a clearer indication of the outcome of one system versus the other. Are you familiar with a socialist system that works just as well as a capitalist system, or holds its own at least?
Look, it's not my expertise, but people usually bring out Sweden. But Sweden left the socialist. They've gotten much more capitalist since the early 90s and become much more effective. And if you have a thriving capitalist system, you can support healthcare, you can support jobs, and helping those who need it the most. And what I wrote the book about was to say, how can we use our capitalist system that works well in so many ways and doesn't work well in others? How can we use some of the success to help other people? So I would be the first to argue that we have a lot of work to do. But socialist system usually ends up being that someone's in charge of distributing the money. And so it becomes very eventually totalitarian, and people have different opinions, if you haven't noticed, about what's the best use for that
Right.
money. And so it usually ends badly with someone in charge that not everyone agrees with, and obviously with absolute power that corrupts because they're distributing all the money in the economy. And of course, if you take out all the incentives to do well, you're not very efficient, as you just described, two sides of a wall. You can see the difference between it. So they both have problems. So there's, which is the least bad, you could say. Which is the least bad system, and then you don't have to go defending it. You just have to say, all right, we have the least bad system, now let's make it better.
Right. I like that. Okay, let's do the pivot. So I found some writing by someone named Zvi Friedman online, and I really liked it. An analysis of the Jewish take on these two systems. And so he wrote, and he quoted a professor, Yehuda Levi, in an essay called "Is the Torah Capitalistic or Socialistic?" which is a really interesting essay if anyone wants to check it out. It's available online. And his conclusion, to cut to the chase, was that Judaism is capitalism with a socialist spirit. And his understanding was that capitalism is the idea that people can work together to create and increase value. And socialism is the idea that the more we share that value, the better. And so maybe there doesn't have to be fundamental conflict between these two ideas. Is there not a way to create a synthesis, as I think we could argue that at least the Jewish tradition has done that to some degree? On the one hand, we have all these injunctions to give charity, to tithe, to take care of the widow and the orphan. There's a flat tax. There's a tax that goes to the Kohanic, the priestly class, and the Levitical class, and those are enforceable. That's not open capitalism as we understand it. When you're compelled to give away part of your income, but maybe it represents a decent balance. So my question is a hybrid approach conceivable that makes both sides a little happy?
It depends. When I wrote in the book, I was looking for, I guess, answering those questions. Some of them, what can we do to make sure that everyone is taken care of? I guess by a capitalist system, which in a free market, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. So some of the things I wrote about was we certainly have unequal educational opportunity in this country. I talked about certain ways to help solve that. I talked about how, if you're willing to work, that we make sure everyone gets a living wage. That, in other words, how can we guarantee that everyone makes at least $15, $20 an hour if they're willing to work? That seemed reasonable to me, and I figured out a way, at least in my mind, that we could do it for less than free. Maybe we could make sure that everyone has that kind of wage, and we'd actually make money, because you take a lot of people out of childhood poverty. You do a lot of good things by making sure that people have a living wage. I even talked about, bringing in, there's so many people, there's so many countries, and some of them are socialist-like, some of them don't have safety or ability to earn a living. The system isn't working very well, and there's so many people who want to come to this country who are very skilled and bright, and immigrants are responsible for forming 51% of company startups that, over $1 billion. They've, if you get a skilled immigrant, what they bring to the table, what they pay in taxes versus what they use, each one brings in another $500,000 or $1 million to the government and creates 2 jobs for people who are already here. I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that. 216 of the Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or their kids. So, it's another way. I called it a free gold mine, and of course, refugees and, the Statue of Liberty, can we bring over people who aren't necessarily skilled, but really need the help? Mm-hmm. And yes, if we bring in more skilled immigrants, we'll have a lot more money, and we can, spend it either on childhood poverty here, or we could bring in more unskilled immigrants who need the help, refugees. That I don't want to battle out that where should we spend the money best, but I take the free money and then figure that out. Talked about how banks can help smaller businesses grow right now. The way the system's set up, it's set up for large banks and large businesses, and I think small businesses and individuals could use the help. And talk about how, talk about inequality. 9/10 of families in the top fifth have retirement savings. 9/10 of the families in the bottom fifth of income don't. So what can we do to change that? So I'm saying there are issues. I'm trying to come up with things that we can do that I think are very doable, that we should be doing to make things better. So I'm admitting, and not even admitting, it's just more observant, like everybody else observes, that there's a lot of inequality in the system.
Yeah.
And I don't think our goal should be equality. I think a living wage for everyone, a good education for everyone, medical care for everyone. That I am for all those things. So I think those are good social goals. I don't think equality of income is one of them. I think.
Would that fall under a redistribution category in your mind?
I would. It varies. If you're talking about a living wage, right now, childhood poverty, for instance, it already costs us $1 trillion a year. And 40% of people who get an hourly wage, earn between $7 and $13. So if we could get them, everyone, $15 to $20. Right now, we have a program called the Earned Income Tax Credit, and it does exactly what we're saying. It supplements your income. If your income is low, what I don't love about raising everyone's minimum wage to $20 or $15 or whatever is if your skills only contribute $9, it's very hard to make a company pay you that. They'll get a piece of technology, or the thing will be made overseas, or things like that. But I do think that's a place for government to supplement income from the private sector. And we have a program called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which basically, if you earn, if you have a family and you're earning below a certain amount, they'll supplement, with $3,500 or $6,500. And the program now is the third biggest social welfare program we have. We spent $68 billion in 2018 on that program, and it took 6 million kids out of poverty. And I make a modest proposal in the book that we should increase it to $1 trillion a year, from 68 billion. And then I explain how it actually pays for itself. Because now these people are paying taxes, they're paying, income taxes, they're paying sales taxes. The employers are paying more taxes. So the $1 trillion cost gets down to 600 billion. And then if you had this, if you increase 68 billion to $1 trillion, now the cost of childhood poverty we're already incurring is $1 trillion a year in incarceration costs, in poor health care, poor education, homelessness, social service costs. There's tons of costs, and University of Chicago study came out and said it costs us $1 trillion a year already. I think this would probably take care of half of that, and then there are adult medical costs that would save you another 200 billion. So I go through the math and I show how actually it would be net zero cost, how we could do that. Now I realize that we're not going to go from 68 billion to $1 trillion right away. So I suggest we just triple it right away. We'll see how good it goes, and then I go through the math of that. I mean, the 68 billion now, University of Chicago study said, really only costs us 9 billion net, which is pretty de minimis. So we spend 68 billion, but the net cost of it is 9 billion, given everything we get back and the children take out of poverty and all those things. So there's a lot of great things we could do if we sort of thought like long-term investor, saying, look, we'll invest in these people and look at all the good things we'll get, and we'll save all this money over the long term. And so that's sort of the take of the book.
So, Joel, I know that education is near and dear to your heart, and you are one of the founders of Success Academy, which to me is an unbelievably impressive organization. But I wonder if you could talk to our audience for a minute about what it is and and how your business sense contributed to its creation, and what you feel is the benefits to children as a result.
Okay, I appreciate the way you phrased the question, because we did look at it as a business problem, with the profits being kids learning, the outcome being kids learning, and it's a not-for-profit. Charter school is a not-for-profit in New York City, and you apply for one, and if you have the right setup, and New York has a very good system to make sure that the people get to it's basically, a charter school is an independently run school outside the regular district system, but it's funded by the state. Okay, so you have to qualify to be able to run one, and then you have to qualify to keep running it, that you're doing a good job. That's what a charter school is, just before we get started. And of course, it costs some money to help get it started, which was what my partner John Petrie did, and we hired a wonderful woman, Eva Moskowitz, who started the first school. But the idea is that there are a lot of one-off good schools. You can put a lot of resources and time and effort and throw money at it and make a good school. But our idea from a business standpoint was to make a school that could be replicated. Every school can't have the top 1% of teachers, because you run out of the top 1% of teachers very quickly. So how can you set up a system that's replicable, that works with an average teacher? Obviously, you want to make the average teachers really good, so you have to give them the support and things like that. But the nature was it to replicate, to say, can we? And our big, hairy, audacious goal at the beginning was to open 40 schools. We started in 2006. We now have 46 schools. There's 20,000 kids that go to Success Academy. They're all in New York City. If you took those 20,000 kids and how they did on the state math and English scores, they beat every district in the state, and that includes Scarsdale's, Great Neck, everything else. Over 90% of the kids are proficient at math and English. They pass the state test. Most of the kids are Black or Hispanic, minority, low income, the vast majority, about 90%. And they outperform the wealthiest school districts in the state. Now, there's a real problem, because if you live in a top 50 urban center in this country, and you are Black, Hispanic, or low income, your chance of graduating college is 1 out of 11. All right? And what we wanted to show was it's not from lack of ability.
Right.
All right. And so if you're a college graduate, you make 70% more than if you're not a college graduate. And if you're a high school graduate, make 30% more than if you're a high school dropout. So if only 1 out of 11 are making it, it's pretty unequal opportunity, which it is. And the reason for that is that the way our school systems are set up is that everyone gets a choice of what school they go to. Because if you have any money, you move to a school district that has a school that you think is pretty good. Right. The only people who can't do that are very low income people who can't move or don't have really a choice of where they live. So they're stuck with the school that's in their neighborhood. So the idea behind the charter school was to give them another choice. Everybody else has a choice. So it's the idea of give low income, and that's part of capitalism. Like if you have a choice, there's competition, and everyone, and it's not fair. If you're the only one, if you're the lowest income, you don't have a choice, and your chance is 1 out of 11 if you go to one of those schools. That's not fair. So that was the idea behind giving another choice. That's a nice picture for charter schools. But I would say that only 7% of schools are charter schools in the country. Not all of them are good. There are good ones, there are bad ones. There are good schools and bad schools. So it's not like charters are good, district schools are bad. I wrote about a district school run in Brooklyn, in one of the poorest districts in the state, where 99% of the kids pass the math exam and 94% pass the English exam. Except that's the statistics for the kids with disabilities at that school. 99% of the kids with disabilities pass the math exam, 94% pass the English exam. For English language learners at that school, 90% pass the English exam. They're English language learners. Across the city, it's 9%. So it's 10 times better. So I talk about that great principle, what he does and everything else. But my point was really this. My point is, with the right support, every kid can perform at a very high level. So our system is 700 billion K through 12 we spend a year, including college. It's $1 trillion a year. Very hard to change through philanthropy. There's a lot of reasons why there's a lot of entrenched interest. There's a lot of reasons why it's hard to change a big system like that. So what I suggest in the book is sort of a workaround. I ask my kids at Columbia, I say, and this is, I remember asking this at the top of his career. I said, how do you beat Tiger Woods? And my answer was, don't play him in golf. And,
right.
And so I think we could, I think we should keep trying to change the system, make it better, make better choices for kids who need it, and all those things. And we should keep working on that. But I suggested an end around that Google, Microsoft, Amazon, JP Morgan could do to help kids who obviously have the ability, right? All these kids who get the support, whether it's at Success or great district schools, I gave you the statistics, they can all outperform Scarsdale and Great Neck kids with the right support. So what can we do for those kids right now to get them high-paying jobs, get them the opportunity to get high-paying jobs? And so this is what I suggested that Google, Microsoft, Amazon, JP Morgan could do. I suggested that they set standards. What courses, what certificates, what tests can they take? Just name what those standards are, that if you pass them or do well on them, we will put you up. Let's say you want to get a job in the HR department at Microsoft. Microsoft just says, you got to pass this test, get the certificate, pass this course. That's it. It could be online. It could be, you can learn about it there. Imbolis, together with McKinsey, came up with game-based tests that test your decision-making ability and critical thinking skills. So it doesn't have to be the standard test. But all these companies have to do is set a standard. What do we have to do outside in lieu of a college degree? And then I suggest and I describe how a whole ecosystem of supportive services will help people try to pass these courses and tests. They'll be rated like Airbnbs and Uber drivers.
Good.
And a lot of these resources can be free. A lot of them can be online. A lot of them can be private tutoring supported by philanthropy or communities. But I describe how countries in Africa, as long as there's a buyer at the end of the day, so they've had cell service where people really need the cell service. They figured out how they could make 25 cents. You could get a cell phone call for 25 cents. And in countries that have no infrastructure. And because people needed those phone calls, because if you're going to bring your crops 3-day journey, it would be nice to know the price before you left, and it's worth the 25 cents. So there is a demand, and then you get cell towers, you get electricity, you get roads, you get all these things. The demand starts it going. And so if these companies have the demand, it says, I'll hire you. There's a buyer at the end of the day for passing this test. There'll be a whole ecosystem that sets up to try to pass these. And if you didn't have a good education, there'll be prerequisite courses that you could take to get you ready to take that exam. And I describe in the book how that can happen. And that's sort of capitalism, but at the end of the day, you need the buyer. And the buyer is Google, Microsoft, Amazon setting the standard that if you do this in lieu of a college degree, and what I would suggest is if you grew up in Scarsdale or Great Neck or something like that, these companies probably wouldn't look so great at you if you didn't go to college, because you had that opportunity. Maybe you're a little lazy. But if you came from a disadvantaged background and you were able to pass these tests or take these courses or whatever, I think they look like you were very ambitious. And I show all kinds of studies showing that having a diverse employee base, you make a lot more money. Having right now, college graduates are a very insular bunch. They're mostly wealthy. They come from certain places. There are not a lot of minorities. There's a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of studies showing that if you have a very diverse employee base, you actually end up making a lot more money and make better decisions and a lot of other of those things. So this is a way to get those people there. This is for the 10 out of 11 who are not getting college degrees. 10 out of 11. So we need to do something This is what big companies can do to help push it along, and they can do it today.
So that seems like a perfect example of what the book is about and what you're talking about. That's capitalist thinking being brought to bear on a social ill, and suggesting perhaps a better solution than what we've had previously, which seems like the whole point. So when for our overall conception here is capitalism moral, or can it be? You've presented several examples tonight of where it just seems irrefutable to me that it certainly can be. And I've mentioned that I think you've mentioned it also, that there are certain, let's call them more socialist trappings that can be brought to bear on that system that can also enhance the benefits to the people, to humanity. And I just wanted to mention a couple of more Judaic ideas and how they fit in, possibly. And also we have a number of questions that seem to have come up here. There's a guy named James Harrington, who apparently was an influential 17th century guy, graduated from Harvard. And he was the first guy to advocate the redistribution of wealth. That the idea, just simply that the government should and could take from the rich and give to the poor. And tracing that back, there's a book called The Hebrew Republic by a guy named Eric Nelson. And he suggests that this is based on the concept of what's in Hebrew is known as the Yovel, or the Jubilee year in Judaism, where every 50 years, the land, as it had been passed from one person to another through sales or rentals, more accurately, would ultimately return back to the original owner. That there was this reset of the entire land because, according to the book of Joshua, the land was apportioned by God to the people, and everyone got a plot. It was all divided up, and then you could do business. It was like playing with Monopoly money. You could, you did this deal, you did this deal, but at the end, like all the money was taken back and re-given, and there was a redo. So that struck me as an extremely non-capitalist, like a way of looking at things. On the one hand, we're saying the property is not yours. It's yours to use, but there is no actual ownership. And the reason is because ultimately, in this conception, the land belongs to God. And I wonder if that's not the piston, the pivot that this whole thing could possibly rest on. If there is some kind of connection between the socialist system and the capitalist system, I wonder, and I think ethics and morals is baked in there, has to be baked in, that neither one of those systems is going to be of any benefit to anyone. Neither is religion as a system going to be of any benefit to anyone if immoral people are conducting it. And as such, it seems to me that the more we teach people the concept of morality itself, the more likely people are to conduct themselves in any system in a moral way. And I don't know if Success Academy or any school in America actively teaches ethics, and I would be very interested to know about that. But certainly, it seems to me that the Torah does not have a very favorable view of governments overall. It sort of views it as a necessary evil, but it really wants to empower individuals to think for themselves and to make good moral choices. Of course, understanding what the parameters are to be able to make those choices. But in that sense, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, and I'll get your reaction, and then we'll go to the questions. But I did discover that Locke, who I think we owe many of our founding ideals to, said that a person has a right, a natural right to life, liberty, and property. But interestingly, he also said, you have to give to your needy brother the right to your surplus of goods, not out of your mercy, but by justice. And he said, whose justice? By the justice of the same one who provided you with these goods to begin with. Does that seem like a good way of looking at this entire conundrum?
I'm not a socialist. I don't think it's been proven that, a true socialist system has worked anywhere. It doesn't make much economic sense to me, just understanding how the world works and how progress is made. Having said that, we could have a much more benevolent version of capitalism where there are certain things that are understood, that everyone should have the right to a good education and the opportunity to have a good education. That if, for whatever reason, you don't have enough to eat, or you don't have enough for medical care, or if you work, that you should be guaranteed a living wage. There are things that can be done to take a system that works better than anything else I've seen and make it more moral. Obviously, that's why we have taxes. That's why we could be a lot more efficient. Unfortunately, there are human beings involved, and a lot of, we're all Jewish, so we, or most of us listening are Jewish, and so we know there's, however many people are watching, that's how many opinions there are, and so it's very hard to reach a. Yeah, so there's, I can't even agree with myself. You're right. So, so it's difficult, but I think if we are more goal oriented, and that's what I tried to do when I wrote the book, just say this is not a Democratic proposal, Republican proposal, a capitalist proposal, a socialist proposal. I'm saying this is how things are. How can we make them better? Do I? And there's ways to do it, and I think. Right, we don't have to fix everything. We just have to try to make it better. Right, that's a Jewish principle, right?
For sure.
We just, and so I think there's ways that we can easily make it better, and that we have the tools to make it better right now. And there are simple things that we just have to agree that that's our goal. And some version of some of the things that I mentioned are ways to get there. I mean, we can agree on how to get there, but these are goals that I think most people would have. And I think they see the inequality in our system, and we'd like to fix it. I don't think socialism's the answer, or some version of socialism, but I do think a benevolent capitalism where there are certain standards that everyone has to have, enough to eat, a place to live, good education, healthcare, those kind of things.
That sounds like what Bernie's advocating. I don't know. It doesn't sound particularly different,
Right. So I made how we could do it while still growing the pie for everyone, instead of taking all the incentives away from the system. Bernie's been shown that all the things that or many of the things that he's suggested, when the bill comes due, it's very hard to pay for it. And so I tried to stick to things that we can do, but I think all his goals are reasonable.
Right.
And I think we can pay for them if done in a reasonable way.
Okay, excellent. So we got a couple of questions here. I just wanted to start with the last one. You can see in the chat. It says, "Hi, Joel. I've gotten through most of the book. Very enjoyable as all of your writing. How can you influence politicians and leaders to adopt these solutions?"
Oh, that's funny. I just got a call from a U.S. senator today asking for money. And so he's going to be reading the book, and he's going to be getting money. But I'm going, I'm doing what I can. I spent 3 years writing the book. I tried to make it appealing to both sides of the aisle. So in other words, a consensus type solutions. And I've been on a bunch of podcasts. I think, a number of them heard by hundreds of thousands of people, and I'm trying to get it to, I don't think this book will be, well, my goal is not for it to be a bestseller. My goal isn't to get in the hands of influencers, like people who run Microsoft and Google, and have them implement some of these ideas. Same with the government. And I hope it wins based on the quality of the ideas. And I'm also happy to have a discussion. I named the book Common Sense, which is named after Thomas Paine. And I pointed out at the beginning of the book that even though Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense, that George Washington credits for, inspiring the revolution and, getting people to fight, he offended so many people in his lifetime that only 6 people showed up for his funeral. So I tried to avoid.
Not really funny.
I said in the book, I have a big family, so hopefully you won't be too offended, and at least this will start the discussion. And so that was my goal.
Okay, that's good. That sounds good, and I hope you're successful with that. Here's a question that says, microcredit is a good example of integration of profit and making a difference without having to wait for success to give back. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think in economies where the economy in countries where the economy doesn't function very well, and there's no way for the unbanked, small business people just on a very basic level to get credit to start a little business. Microcredit is a great example of how either philanthropy or government can kickstart, but it also talks to the fact that microcredit is so successful in economies that don't work very well. It's sort of an argument for capitalism, some of the benefits of capitalism, where people's incentive to make a living for their family or just farm food that they share with other people for a price. I mean, that's capitalism. It's
Right.
very hard to say that there's a bad part to that. There's a good part to that. Of course, all these things can be abused, and people in control can take advantage, and there can be inequality that isn't shared fairly, and those are things that have to be dealt with. But the actual basic of capitalism makes total sense, and microcredit is a great example that you can get very small entrepreneurs. People have a little food stand or whatever it is. They're capitalists. They
Right.
might not think about it, but they're capitalists.
Well, Joel, we are almost out of time, and this has been really enriching and enlightening, and I know you're very busy and have a lot on your plate, so I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. And the book is called Common Sense, and it's available on Amazon. I suggest all of Joel's writing is very readable. You can get through it in a few days and really understand it. It's a really good investment of time, and who knows, maybe this is going to become a pivotal work in our society that's going to take capitalism. There's all of his books, but it's going to take capitalism to the next level and integrate a much greater sense of moral obligation in our capitalism, which to me would be a wonderful contribution to society at large, especially in a time when we really need more sides coming together. So I wish you great success with this book. I wish you a happy new year. And I want to thank you sincerely for being here again. Thank you, Joel.
Thanks, Adam. It was great to be here.
Have a good night. And also just wanted to mention that we have an upcoming virtual gala, which is going to feature Ambassador David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, and also several great entertainment guests, including Nissim Black, a rapper who became a Jew, and he has a fascinating story. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be brief, online, and please check it out if you want. Oh, there you go. There is the way to register. You can go to asianygala.com. I encourage people to check it out and to join us if you can. It's been a real pleasure being with you once again, and see you next time. Have a great evening.